So if we look at the foregut now in more detail, we can see that coming here, we've got the coeliac trunk. The coeliac trunk is going to give rise to left gastric artery here, and this will run along the lesser curvature of the stomach. We can also see that coming away from the coeliac trunk is what's known as the common hepatic artery. And the common hepatic artery will give rise to a blood vessel which is called the gastroduodenal. We'll come back to that later on. And then once it's giving rise to the gastroduodenal, it then becomes the hepatic artery proper. And coming from the hepatic artery proper, we then find we have the right gastric. And the right gastric artery is going to anastomose with the left gastric artery around the lesser curvature of the stomach. Remember, we spoke about this briefly when we did the anatomy of the stomach in an earlier lecture. Running around this lesser curvature, we have the left gastric and the right gastric, forming this loop. Another branch that we haven't mentioned yet coming from this coeliac trunk is this large splenic artery that runs to the spleen. This gives rise to some short gastric arteries that supply the fundus and the posterior body of the stomach. And as it approaches the hilum of the spleen, the splenic artery gives rise to this left gastroamental artery. The left gastroamental artery runs along the greater curvature of the stomach, and this is going to actually anastomose, form another anastomotic loop with the right gastroamental artery, and this gastroamental artery comes from the gastroduodenal that I mentioned. So we can see that the coeliac trunk gives rise to two anastomotic rings of arteries that supply both the lesser curvature and the greater curvature. We can return to the vasculature of the liver and the coeliac trunk giving rise to the hepatic artery, then the hepatic artery proper will ultimately then run up and supply the left and right hepatic arteries to the left and right functional lobes. We also have the cystic artery, which comes typically from the right, and that runs to the gallbladder. If we then look on the other side of the screen, we can see the actual detail, which is the gastroduodenal artery bifurcating and giving rise to important blood vessels that supply the head of the pancreas and the duodenum. Here we can see the gastroduodenal artery. Now remember, the gastroduodenal artery would have given rise to a right gastroamental, and then the gastroduodenal artery continues and it bifurcates into two. It bifurcates into two arteries, which are the anterior and posterior superior pancreatico-duodenal arteries. We can see we've got a very short stem of superior pancreatico-duodenal artery, which quickly goes into a posterior and an anterior that are passing inferiorly towards the head of the pancreas and to the duodenum. Now, these two blood vessels, your anterior and posterior superior pancreatico-duodenal arteries, are going to anastomose with the equivalent branches, anterior and posterior branches, of the inferior pancreatico-duodenal artery. And the inferior pancreatico-duodenal artery comes from the superior mesenteric artery. So here we can just about make out approximately where the major duodenal papilla would be located. We can see that everything in this direction is going to be foregut, and everything in this direction is going to be midgut. So this region is going to be supplied by the inferior pancreatico-duodenal artery from the superior mesenteric artery, whereas everything in this direction is going to be supplied by the superior pancreatico-duodenal artery. And this is a branch from the coeliac trunk. And here we have this important transition of blood between the foregut and the midgut.